Imagine inheriting the greatest kingdom on earth, only to find yourself powerless against the cold grip of death. Stay to watch the untold story of Solomon's rise, where a terrified prince faces execution before he ever wears the crown. Wait to see why true prosperity isn't about gold, but about surviving the politics of fear and the bloodiest purge in Israel's history. We will reveal how a little boy's dream unlocked the mind of God and built an empire of unimaginable wealth, only to lose it all to the seduction of vanity. Don't miss the shocking truth behind the 666 talents of gold and the tragic exchange of divine glory for cheap bronze. This is the autopsy of a soul that gained the world but lost itself. Prepare for a revelation. This is the Bible teaches. The air within the royal chambers of Jerusalem carries a suffocating weight, a dense mixture of medicinal incense, old wool, and the unmistakable smell of a life slowly fading away. It is 970 BC, and the man lying trembling beneath piles of thick blankets bears no resemblance to the giant of faith celebrated in the songs of Israel. David, the Lion of Judah, the conqueror of Jerusalem, the warrior poet who expanded the kingdom's borders from the Euphrates to Egypt, is dying. And he is dying of cold. The Bible, with its surgical honesty, opens the book of 1 Kings with an image of devastating frailty. Now King David was old and advanced in years, and they covered him with clothes, but he could not get warm. This cold that penetrates the king's bones is not merely a physical condition, it is a prophetic symbol of the end of an era. The heat of battle, the fire of passion, the fervor of worship, all seem to have been extinguished, leaving only a wrinkled body trembling uncontrollably, unable to generate its own temperature. For young Solomon, observing from the shadows of the cedar corridors, this sight is terrifying. The prosperity he is about to inherit is not a solid, unshakable structure. It is tied to the weak heartbeat of an old man who can barely open his eyes. The presence of Abishag, the Shunammite, in the king's chamber adds a layer of silent humiliation to the scene. She, young and beautiful, was brought not for sexual pleasure, but as a human hot water bottle, a desperate attempt by the court physicians to transfer vitality to the dying monarch. For Solomon, seeing his father, the man who had dozens of wives and exuded virility, reduced to this passive dependence, is the first cruel lesson about the ephemeral nature of human power. All the accumulated glory, all the gold plundered from the Philistines, Moabites, and Arameans cannot buy a single degree of warmth for the king's body. Material prosperity before the icy face of death proves powerless. Solomon realizes with a knot in his stomach that the inheritance awaiting him is immense, but the man who built it is crumbling like a sandcastle in the high tide. The kingdom's security hangs by a thread, and that thread is David's wheezing breath. But the cold inside the palace is merely a reflection of the dangerous heat burning outside. While David agonizes in silence, Jerusalem buzzes with the noise of betrayal. Adonijah, Solomon's older brother, David's fourth son, decided he would not wait for the funeral. He is described as very handsome in appearance, a characteristic that in Israel often masked a rotten character. Remember Saul and Absalom. Adonijah embodies false prosperity. He has the looks, he has the ambition, and he has the chariots. He had chariots and horsemen made for himself, and 50 men to run before him. It is the ostentation of power before the possession of power. He looked at the leadership vacuum left by his ailing father and said, "I will reign." This self-proclamation is the antithesis of true biblical prosperity, which is always received as a gift, never taken as spoils. Adonijah did not consult God. He consulted his own vanity and the military strength of Joab. Tension reaches its peak at the Zoheleth stone, beside the Rogel Spring, a place dangerously close to the walls of Jerusalem, yet far enough away to conceal whispers of conspiracy. There, Adonijah sacrifices sheep, oxen, and fattened animals. The smell of barbecue and wine fills the air, mingled with the laughter of the captains and princes who have decided to bet on the strongest horse. They celebrate King Adonijah while the true king still breathes. Solomon was not invited. Nathan was not invited. Bathsheba was not invited. This exclusivism is the hallmark of the politics of fear. For Solomon, the distant sound of this feast is not one of joy. It is the sound of his own death sentence. In ancient times, when a new king assumed the throne in a contested manner, the first measure of stability was the execution of all potential rivals. Solomon knows that if Adonijah ascends the steps of the throne, Solomon's head will roll in the dust before sunset. At this point, Solomon's idea of prosperity has nothing to do with riches, palaces, or wisdom. Prosperity for him now means only one thing: survival. He is God's chosen one, Jedediah, beloved of the Lord, but he seems to have been abandoned by men. He has no army. Joab is with Adonijah, no official priesthood. Abiathar is with Adonijah, and no biological birthright. He has only an ancient promise made to a mother marked by scandal, and a prophet who dares to believe that God has not forgotten what he said. The story of the world's greatest wealth begins here, not in a bank, but in an emotional bunker, where a frightened prince awaits to learn whether he will be crowned or beheaded, while his father shivers with cold and his brother toasts to his destruction. The opening lesson is clear. True prosperity is often born in the womb of chaos, gestated in utter insecurity, to prove that when it arrives, it will not be the work of human cleverness, but of divine intervention. While the royal palace smells of medicine and death, the Kidron Valley, a short distance from the city walls, smells of betrayal and barbecue. Understanding the geography of the coup is necessary to grasp Adonijah's audacity. He chose the Stone of Zoheleth near the Rogel Spring, a strategic location south of Jerusalem. This is no random choice. It's a political stage. There, where the waters flow and the vegetation is densest, Adonijah set up the headquarters of his insurrection disguised as a religious festival. The Bible describes the event with a guest list that would read like a who's who of Israel's elite. And he invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the men of Judah, the king's servants. Deal. It's a massive show of force. Adonijah is attempting to win the crown through popular acclaim and military consensus, creating a fait accompli before the old king breathes his last. What happens in Zoheleth is the perfect definition of false prosperity. Adonijah possesses all the outward markers of success. He has physical beauty, a crucial political asset in antiquity. He has chronological primogeniture, being the eldest surviving son after the deaths of Amnon and Absalom. And he has the support of institutions. Look at who is by his side: Joab and Abiathar. Joab is not just a soldier, he is the living legend who conquered Jerusalem, the undefeated general who expanded the empire, the man who knows where everybody is buried because he is the one who buried them. Having Joab on your side is like having control of the nuclear arsenal, and Abiathar, he is the high priest, the sole survivor of the massacre at Nob, the man who carried the ephod for decades alongside David. When the church, Abiathar, and the army, Joab, unite with the heir apparent Adonijah, the prosperity of the coup seems inevitable, solid as the stone on which they are sacrificing. But the biblical text, with its subtle irony, points not to those who were there, but to those who were not. But Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah, and the mighty men, and Solomon his brother, he did not invite. This exclusion list is a signed death sentence. In the brutal politics of the ancient Middle East, not being invited to the coronation is not a social faux pas, it is a warning of execution. Adonijah knows that Solomon is the theological rival, the secret chosen one of Yahweh. By excluding him, Adonijah draws a line of blood in the sand. The feast in Zoheleth is in fact a pre-funeral for Solomon. While they eat roasted meat and drink wine, toasting "Long live King Adonijah," they are in practice toasting the end of Bathsheba's lineage. Their joy is fueled by the certainty of the elimination of their enemies. It is prosperity built upon the elimination of the other, success that requires victims to sustain itself. The psychology of Adonijah deserves highlighting here. Verse 5 of 1 Kings 1 says, "Then Adonijah the son of Haggith exalted himself, saying, 'I will be king.'" The key phrase is exalted himself. Adonijah's prosperity is self-induced. He didn't wait for God's anointing, he manufactured his own. He bought chariots and horses to appear kingly before he was king. He lives by the logic of appearances, personal marketing, and brute force. He represents the human path to success, unbridled ambition, strategic alliances with the powerful, and the elimination of competitors. It's a path that seems to work. After all, the feast is full, the people are shouting, and the food is plentiful. To any outside observer in Zoheleth that day, prosperity was with Adonijah. God seemed to be with the strongest. However, there is a fatal flaw in the architecture of this coup: the silence of God. There is no record of prayer in Zoheleth. There is no prophet of God sanctioning the act. Nathan was excluded. Adonijah's prosperity is a magnificent and colorful bubble about to burst at the first contact with the needle of divine will. Joab, the old pragmatic general, bet on Adonijah because Joab always bets on survival and strength, and he saw David as a sinking ship. He miscalculated. He forgot that the kingdom of Israel is neither a democracy nor a military meritocracy. It is a theocracy. Joab and Adonijah's miscalculation is believing they can force God's hand through the politics of fait accompli. While they wipe the grease of sacrifices from their beards and laugh loudly, secure in their arrogance, on the other side of the valley, in the tense silence of Queen Bathsheba's chambers, the true gears of history are about to turn. Adonijah's conspiracy teaches us that the prosperity we take for ourselves is always more fragile than the prosperity that God gives us. The feast in Zoheleth is the last gasp of the flesh, trying to usurp the place of the spirit. While toasts echo in Zohelete, the silence in the palace is broken by the hurried sound of sandals in the stone corridors. Nathan, the prophet, is not a man of war like Joab, but he understands battles that are won with words, not swords. He understands the mathematics of exclusion. If he and Bathsheba do not act now, they will be dead tomorrow. Nathan intercepts Bathsheba with an urgency that dispenses with royal etiquette. Have you not heard that Adonijah reigns and that our Lord David does not know it? Adonijah's conspiracy counted on the slowness of the bureaucracy and the senility of the king, but underestimated the prophet's agility. Nathan draws up the counterattack plan right there, a script for political theater where every line must be precise to awaken the sleeping lion. "Go, enter to King David, and I will enter after you and confirm your words." It is a maneuver of psychological pincer movement. They need to surround the king with the truth before Adonijah's lie takes hold. Bathsheba enters the inner chamber. The biblical text makes a point of reminding us the king was very old. The atmosphere is funereal. Abishag is there, serving the king, a silent witness to history being rewritten. Bathsheba bows, not just in reverence, but in a plea for life or death. She doesn't appeal to the romantic love of the past, that fire has already gone out. She appeals to honor and theology. "My lord, the king, has sworn to his servant by the Lord his God." She invokes the oath, and then she drops the bombshell. "The eyes of all Israel are upon you." She pulls David from his geriatric isolation and places him back at the center of national responsibility. She paints the scene of the immediate future. "It shall come to pass, when my lord the king lies down with his fathers, that I and my son Solomon shall be held guilty." The word guilty here is a euphemism for executed as traitors. She will place Solomon's blood on David's hands if he does not act. Before David can process the shock, Nathan enters. The timing is perfect. He confirms everything and adds the final insult, "Long live King Adonijah." He reveals that Adonijah's feast is already underway and that the exclusion of the loyalists was deliberate. Indignation ignites a final spark in the old warrior's heart. David rises, perhaps with physical difficulty, but with absolute spiritual clarity. He makes a new oath, not for his crown, but for his survival. "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my soul from all distress." David recognizes that his true prosperity was never the throne, but God's redemption amidst crises. And moved by this memory of divine faithfulness, he issues the world-changing order, "Have my son Solomon ride on my own mule and take him to Gibeon." The choice of mule is crucial. Horses were for war, and Adonijah had chariots and horses. The mule was the ceremonial transport of royalty in times of peace. Placing Solomon on the king's mule was a visual act of power transfer stronger than any written decree. And the choice of Gibeon? The Gibeon spring is in the Kidron Valley, but at a lower point and very close to the Rogel spring, where Adonijah was. The proximity was intentional and dangerous. David was having Solomon crowned under the noses of the conspirators. It was an extremely high-risk gamble. If Joab decided to attack, there would be a bloodbath in the valley. The procession rushes down. Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah, the chief of the personal guard, the Cherethites and Pelethites, surround young Solomon. Imagine Solomon's heart pounding against his ribs as he mounts his father's mule. He who felt like a little boy is now being thrust into center stage by the force of history. They arrive at Gibeon. There is no time for long speeches. Zadok takes the horn of oil from the tabernacle and pours it over Solomon's head. The oil runs down his beard, his garments, the scent of sacred anointing mingling with the sweat of fear. The trumpet sounds. The people who were there, caught by surprise but loyal to David, begin to shout, "Long live King Solomon!" The sound of the flute and the joy of the people are described as so intense that the earth split open with their noise. This noise rises up the valley. It is the sound of true prosperity drowning out the sound of false prosperity. In Zoheleth, the music stops. Joab, with his ear trained for war, is the first to notice. Why is there this uproar in the city? Adonijah's celebration dies instantly. The banquet turns into a wake before it even ends. Solomon's anointing was not planned with elegant invitations. It was a command operation, raw, swift, and divinely sanctioned. Solomon ascends from Gibeon no longer as the threatened prince, but as the Lord's anointed. His legitimacy came from above, God and David, while Adonijah's came from below, ego and allies. The lesson here is visceral. The prosperity that God establishes may seem late and improvised, but when the oil falls, the earth trembles, and the enemies who seemed invincible are paralyzed by the sound of royal authority. The euphoria of the coronation in Gibeon quickly dissipates when Solomon is summoned back to the dark room where his father lives his final moments. The crowd that shouted, "Long live the king," remained outside. Inside, there is only the labored breathing of a man who knows that death is imminent. David, feeling that he is going the way of all the earth, summons Solomon for one last conversation. We might expect sublime spiritual advice, final psalms of praise, or poetic blessings upon his descendants. And David begins thus with the theology of the covenant. Keep the commandment of the Lord your God, so that you may prosper in all that you do. He establishes the spiritual foundation. Prosperity depends on obedience to the Torah. Without law, there is no throne. It is the classic vision of Deuteronomy, the moral basis of the kingdom. But then, the atmosphere in the room changes. David's tone lowers, his eyes narrow, and the political warrior rises from the ashes of the dying prophet. What follows is one of the most shocking and pragmatically brutal texts in the Bible, 1 Kings 2:5-9. David hands Solomon a hit list. The prosperity of the new kingdom, according to David, cannot coexist with the loose ends of the old kingdom. He says, "You also know what Joab did to me." Decades of resentment simmer. Joab killed Abner and Amasa, two generals in peacetime, putting the blood of war on his belt. David never had the political power to execute Joab, his own nephew and indispensable general, but the stain of blood weighed heavily on David's house. He commands Solomon, "Do not let his gray hairs go down to the grave in peace. It is a cold and calculated death sentence. Act according to your wisdom." David is testing whether Solomon has the stomach to do what needs to be done, and it doesn't stop there. David mentions Shimei, the Benjamite who cursed him with stones and dust when David was fleeing from Absalom. David had sworn not to kill him, but the oath was personal, not dynastic. He transfers the execution to his son. "Do not hold him innocent. You shall bring down his gray hairs in blood to the grave." And amidst these execution orders, a plea for mercy for the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, who helped him during the famine. David's testament is a map of loyalties and betrayals. He is teaching Solomon the hardest lesson of ancient governance. Stability is bought by eliminating threats. There is no room for sentimentality when it comes to maintaining the throne of Yahweh. For young Solomon, hearing these words from the mouth of the man after God's own heart must have been a profound psychological shock. He realizes that holiness does not negate severity. The inheritance he receives is complex, a divine promise of eternal stability and a human order of immediate political assassinations. The wisdom that David demands of him here is not the intellectual wisdom of Proverbs, but the Machiavellian cunning of survival. David dies soon after, weary of days, but leaves Solomon with a sword in his hand and a list of names in his head. David's death ends an era of passion and war and begins the era of Solomon, which paradoxically starts with a bloodbath to secure peace. The prosperity to come, the gold, the temple, the peace, is being laid now in Solomon's decision to honor his father's last somber words. He understands that he cannot build the temple of God while the murderers and traitors of the past still walk freely through the palace courtyards. Cleansing is the prerequisite for construction. Before laying the first stone on Mount Moriah, he needs to remove the stumbling blocks from Jerusalem. The young king emerges from the death chamber no longer as a boy who doesn't know how to get in or out, but as an executioner charged with settling the open accounts of Israel's history. Innocence is over, the reign has begun. David's death brought not peace, but a moment of truth. The official mourning had barely ended when Adonijah committed the fatal error that Solomon, in his newly awakened cunning, had been waiting for. Adonijah goes to Bathsheba, the queen mother, now the most powerful woman in the court, and makes a request that, on the surface, seems romantic, but in the depths of Eastern politics is an attempted coup d'etat. He asks Abishag, the Shunammite, David's last concubine, as his wife. Adonijah plays on the image of the defeated and humble brother, saying that the kingdom was mine, but that he accepts God's will. Bathsheba, perhaps naively, or perhaps testing her son, takes the request to Solomon. Solomon's reaction is explosive and reveals that the little boy has vanished. He instantly understands what his mother didn't see. In the culture of the ancient East, inheriting the harem of the previous king meant claiming the succession to the throne. Adonijah didn't want a wife. He wanted legitimacy for a new uprising. Solomon responds with sharp sarcasm. Ask him for the kingdom too. The mask falls. Solomon's wisdom begins to operate here not as philosophy, but as discernment of intentions. He sees the plot behind the request. That same day, the order is given. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, the loyal executioner, leaves the palace. The sword falls. Adonijah dies, not because he was the king's brother, but because he was a repeat traitor who mistook Solomon's initial mercy for weakness. The first threat is neutralized, but Benaiah's dirty work was only beginning. News of Adonijah's death reaches Joab, the old general. Joab knows his time is up. He doesn't try to flee to Egypt or gather an army. He rushes to the tabernacle of the Lord and clings to the horns of the altar. It's a scene of religious desperation. The altar was considered a sanctuary of refuge. Grasping its horns was an appeal to divine mercy that supposedly made man untouchable by human justice. Joab, who lived by the sword, tries to survive through religion. Solomon is informed. Joab is in the sanctuary. The king faces his first theological legal dilemma. Violating the sanctuary could alienate the priests and the people. But the law of Exodus 21:14 is clear. If a man kills with cunning, you shall take him even from my altar, that he may die. Joab had innocent blood on his hands, Abner and Amasa. God's justice does not protect unrepentant murderers, even if they embrace the altar. Solomon orders, kill him right there. Benaiah enters the sacred tent. Imagine the contrast, the gleam of the sacred bronze, the smell of incense, and the old white-haired warrior clinging to the cold metal, refusing to leave. Benaiah does not hesitate. The sword pierces the last giant of the Davidic era. Joab dies in the dry place, paying for the blood he shed. The house of David is cleansed of the blood guilt that hung over it. The prosperity of the kingdom cannot be built on impunity. Shimei, the man who had cursed, remains. Solomon uses a different tactic, house arrest. He forbids Shimei from crossing the Kidron Valley. On the day you go out, know for certain that you will die. It is a test of obedience. Shimei agrees. For 3 years he lives safely in Jerusalem. But greed, the desire to recover 2 runaway slaves who fled to Gath, causes him to break his oath. Shimei leaves the city, recovers the slaves and returns, thinking the king wouldn't notice. But Solomon sees everything. The breaking of his word is the signing of his sentence. Shimei is executed. The chapter ends with one of the most important phrases in the narrative of 1 Kings. Thus the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. The purge is over. The rivals, Adonijah, the old militarists, Joab, and the political opponents, Shimei, have been removed. Abiathar was exiled, replaced by Zadok. The board has been cleared. Solomon now sits on a throne that no longer trembles. The bloody ascent is complete. He secured peace through force, fulfilling his father's will. But now, with the silence of the dead enemies, a new need arises. Force may conquer a kingdom, but only wisdom can keep it. The political warrior must die so that the wise builder may be born. The stage is empty and ready for the next scene, the ascent to Gibeon and the encounter with the divine. The blood has dried. Now, the gold will begin to flow. With his internal enemies silenced and the borders secure, Solomon turns his attention to the only territory he has not yet conquered, heaven. The young king knows he has inherited David's throne, but he has not yet inherited David's God. There is a silent chasm between the political competence he has just demonstrated in the purge and the spiritual authority he desperately needs to govern. To fill this void, Solomon organizes not a domestic cult, but a national expedition. The destination is Gibeon, about 10 kilometers northwest of Jerusalem. The choice of location reveals the theological complexity of the time. Israel was experiencing a spiritual schizophrenia. The Ark of the Covenant, the mobile throne of God's presence, was in Jerusalem in a simple tent erected by David. But the original tabernacle, the venerable structure of skins and acacia wood built by Moses in the desert, along with the great bronze altar of Bezalel, was in Gibeon. Solomon chooses Gibeon. Perhaps he felt unworthy to approach the raw intimacy of the Ark in Zion, or perhaps he, a lover of pomp and tradition, preferred the institutional grandeur of the ancient tabernacle. Gibeon was the great high place. It was the place of established, solemn and historical religion. The ascent of the king and his court to this sacred place is a spectacle of power. He does not go alone. He takes with him the captains of thousands and of hundreds, the judges and all the princes throughout all Israel. It is a demonstration of unity under the new crown. But beneath the royal robes and the incense beats the heart of a man suffering from spiritual imposter syndrome. He looks at the bronze altar, the same altar where God's fire consumed offerings in the desert, and wonders if that fire will ever fall for him again. What follows is a human attempt to force open the door to the divine through extravagance. The biblical text records laconically, "And he offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar." We need to pause and let the brutality of that number sink in. 1,000 animals. This is not liturgy, it is industrial logistics. A burnt offering, ola, requires the animal to be completely burned. Imagine the time needed to process 1,000 carcasses. Imagine the river of blood flowing down the altar's channels, staining the earth of Gibeon a deep red. Imagine the unbearable heat generated by the fat of 1,000 oxen burning continuously. The bronze altar, designed for the desert, must have become incandescent. The greasy smoke obscured the sun, creating a dark column that could be seen for miles. Why so much? Why the excess? The theology of quantity is often the refuge of the insecure soul. Solomon, feeling small before the giant memory of his father, who worshipped with a harp and a broken heart, tries to compensate for his lack of intimacy with excessive investment. He is trying to buy Yahweh's attention. It is the anxiety of prosperity in its religious form. If I give more than any other king has ever given, God will be obliged to be with me. He transforms worship into a high-volume transaction. He wants to impress the God of the universe as one impresses a neighboring tributary king, with the magnificence of the gift. The day in Gibeon drags on. The lowing of the oxen, the smell of burning flesh, the monotonous chanting of the Levites, the heat, the smoke. It's a total sensory assault. Solomon remains there, overseeing each sacrifice, perhaps waiting for a visible sign, a flash of lightning, an immediate voice. But the day ends only with ashes and silence. The fire consumed the flesh, but God remained silent. Physical exhaustion takes hold of the king. He fulfilled the ritual. He gave his best, or at least his most precious. Night falls on the hills of Benjamin. The sanctuary is quiet, except for the crackling of the embers that still burn the remains of the hecatomb. Solomon retires to his quarters in the structure attached to the sanctuary. He lies down, probably with his ears ringing and his clothes impregnated with the smell of the sacrifice. He closes his eyes, feeling that terrible emptiness that arises when we do everything we think we should do, but still don't feel what we would like to feel. He doesn't know, as deep sleep overtakes him, that his strategy has failed, but that God's grace is about to work. God wasn't drawn by the quantity of bull's blood, but by the sincerity of that young man's desperate search. The answer wouldn't come in the fire of the altar during the day, but in the whisper of a dream during the night. The stage is set for the most important encounter of Solomon's life. He falls asleep as a rich and anxious king. He will awaken as something the world has never seen. The smoke from the 1,000 burnt offerings dissipated, and the silence of the night in Gibeon was absolute. Solomon slept. And it was in this state of vulnerability, when the ego's defenses were lowered and royal pomp was stripped away, that the veil between heaven and earth was torn. The sacred text simply says, "At night the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream." There was no thunder, no earthquake, nor the visual glory that Moses saw in the cleft of the rock. There was a voice in his conscience, a presence that invaded the king's mind with a clarity that wakefulness could never offer. And this voice made the most dangerous offer a human being can receive. "Ask me what you want me to give you." The universe pauses. God has just signed a blank check and handed it to a young man in his 20s. Think of the theological vertigo of that moment. God imposed no conditions, offered no pre-selected menu of blessings. He opened the vault of omnipotence and said, "Help yourself." This is the ultimate test of character. God's question acts like a magnetic resonance imaging scan of the soul. It's not for God to know what we want, but for us to discover who we truly are. Most men, if they had the honesty to answer quickly, would ask for the death of their enemies, security, long life, immortality, or infinite riches, self-sufficiency. These are the universal idols of the fallen heart. Solomon had reasons to ask for any of them. External enemies, Hadad and Rezon, were on the move. Life in ancient times was short and brutal, and the royal treasury needed replenishing after the wars. But Solomon's response reveals that the anxiety he felt did not push him toward greed, but toward humility. He begins his response not by looking to the future, but to the past. He invokes God's great beneficence toward his father David. He anchors himself in the memory of others' grace before asking for his own, and then he makes the confession that dismantles the entire image of mighty king that he tried to project with the 1,000 oxen during the day. In the secret sanctuary of the dream, he admits, "I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out or how to come in." The Hebrew expression Naar Katon, little boy, is shocking on the lips of a reigning monarch. He is confessing his utter inadequacy. The phrase, "I don't know how to go out or come in," is a military and administrative idiocy, meaning, I have no idea how to lead this people through the complexities of war and peace. The mask falls. Imposter syndrome, which has tormented him since his father's death, is finally verbalized before the only being who can cure it. Solomon recognizes that the people are great and innumerable, and that he, by himself, is insufficient. True prosperity begins here, in emptying the "I can." And it is from this fertile vacuum that the request that changed history is born. "Give therefore to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil." Modern translations often impoverish this text by calling it merely wisdom. The original Hebrew is lev shomea, literally a heart that hears. Solomon did not ask for a super-processor brain, high IQ, to solve logical problems. He asked for relational sensitivity to hear God and to hear the hidden truth in human situations. He asked for moral discernment. He did not ask to be served by the world, riches, but to be empowered to serve the world, justice. He asked for the tool of the work, not the wage of the work. The divine reaction is one of palpable pleasure. And this thing pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked for this. God was pleased not only with what Solomon asked for, but crucially with what he did not ask for. He relinquished the right to be rich, long-lived, and vengeful. And because he sought the kingdom first, the law of increase was instantly activated. God says, "And also, that which you did not ask I have given you, both riches and glory, so that there is none like you among kings." Here is the secret that modern prosperity theology so often misses. Legitimate biblical wealth is a side effect, not the goal. It is God's tip for those who are focused on the mission. God promises Solomon systemic and unparalleled prosperity, but it comes packaged with a condition for longevity. "If you walk in my ways, I will prolong your days." Wealth was given unconditionally as a bonus, but the duration of life and kingdom depended on continued faithfulness. Solomon awakens. The text says, "And behold, it was a dream." But the atmosphere in the room changed. He no longer feels the chill of insecurity. His mind is sharp, clear, expanded. He returns to Jerusalem, but he doesn't go to the palace to count coins. He goes to the front of the Ark of the Covenant and offers more sacrifices, now not of anxious supplication, but of gratitude and celebration. He gives a banquet to all his servants. Prosperity began from within. The little boy awoke as the giant of intellect, ready to face the real world with a weapon that no human forge could produce. The mind of Christ lent to a mortal man. The smoke from the 1,000 burnt offerings dissipated, and the silence of the night in Gibeon was absolute. Solomon slept, and it was in this state of vulnerability, when the ego's defenses were lowered and royal pomp was stripped away, that the veil between heaven and earth was torn. The sacred text simply says, "At night the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream." There was no thunder, no earthquake, nor the visual glory that Moses saw in the cleft of the rock. There was a voice in his conscience, a presence that invaded the king's mind with a clarity that wakefulness could never offer. And this voice made the most dangerous offer a human being can receive. "Ask me what you want me to give you." The universe pauses. God has just signed a blank check and handed it to a young man in his 20s. Think of the theological vertigo of that moment. God imposed no conditions, offered no pre-selected menu of blessings. He opened the vault of omnipotence and said, "Help yourself." This is the ultimate test of character. God's question acts like a magnetic resonance imaging scan of the soul. It's not for God to know what we want, but for us to discover who we truly are. Most men, if they had the honesty to answer quickly, would ask for the death of their enemies, security, long life, immortality, or infinite riches, self-sufficiency. These are the universal idols of the fallen heart. Solomon had reasons to ask for any of them. External enemies, Hadad and Rezin, were on the move. Life in ancient times was short and brutal, and the royal treasury needed replenishing after the wars. But Solomon's response reveals that the anxiety he felt did not push him toward greed, but toward humility. He begins his response not by looking to the future, but to the past. He invokes God's great beneficence toward his father David. He anchors himself in the memory of others' grace before asking for his own. And then he makes the confession that dismantles the entire image of mighty king that he tried to project with the 1,000 oxen during the day. In the secret sanctuary of the dream, he admits, "I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out or how to come in." The Hebrew expression na'ar katon, little boy, is shocking on the lips of a reigning monarch. He is confessing his utter inadequacy. The phrase, "I don't know how to go out or come in," is a military and administrative idiocy, meaning I have no idea how to lead this people through the complexities of war and peace. The mask falls. Imposter syndrome, which has tormented him since his father's death, is finally verbalized before the only being who can cure it. Solomon recognizes that the people are great and innumerable, and that he, by himself, is insufficient. True prosperity begins here, in emptying the I can. And it is from this fertile vacuum that the request that changed history is born. Give therefore to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. No, modern translations often impoverish this text by calling it merely wisdom. The original Hebrew is lev shomea, literally, a heart that hears. Solomon did not ask for a superprocessor brain, high IQ, to solve logical problems. He asked for relational sensitivity to hear God and to hear the hidden truth in human situations. He asked for moral discernment. He did not ask to be served by the world, riches, but to be empowered to serve the world, justice. He asked for the tool of the work, not the wage of the work. The divine reaction is one of palpable pleasure. And this thing pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked for this. God was pleased not only with what Solomon asked for, but crucially, with what he did not ask for. He relinquished the right to be rich, long-lived, and vengeful. And because he sought the kingdom first, the law of increase was instantly activated. God says, "And also that which you did not ask I have given you, both riches and glory, so that there is none like you among kings." Here is the secret that modern prosperity theology so often misses. Legitimate biblical wealth is a side effect, not the goal. It is God's tip for those who are focused on the mission. God promises Solomon systemic and unparalleled prosperity, but it comes packaged with a condition for longevity. If you walk in my ways, I will prolong your days. Wealth was given unconditionally as a bonus, but the duration of life and kingdom depended on continued faithfulness. Solomon awakens. The text says, "And behold, it was a dream." But the atmosphere in the room changed. He no longer feels the chill of insecurity. His mind is sharp, clear, expanded. He returns to Jerusalem, but he doesn't go to the palace to count coins. He goes to the front of the Ark of the Covenant and offers more sacrifices, now not of anxious supplication, but of gratitude and celebration. He gives a banquet to all his servants. Prosperity began from within. The little boy awoke as the giant of intellect, ready to face the real world with a weapon that no human forge could produce. The mind of Christ lent to a mortal man. With judicial authority established by blood and sword, Solomon turned his brilliant mind to the engineering of the state. God's wisdom is not only for resolving maternal disputes, it serves to build nations. What we see in 1 Kings 4 is the transformation of Israel from a loose and warlike tribal confederation, the model of David, into a centralized and bureaucratic imperial state, the model of Solomon. The prosperity that begins to flood the land is not magic, nor is it a product of chance. It is the result of an unprecedented administrative restructuring. Solomon, the hearing heart, heard the chaos of tribal disorganization and imposed upon it the order of efficiency. He divided the country into 12 fiscal districts. Note the political astuteness here. He didn't exactly follow the traditional boundaries of the 12 tribes. By redrawing the map, Solomon weakened the old tribal loyalties, which caused so many civil wars, and strengthened loyalty to the central government in Jerusalem. Each district had a governor, some of them married to Solomon's own daughters, ensuring loyalty by blood, and each district was responsible for supporting the royal court for 1 month of the year. It was a perfect logistical machine. The biblical text lists the daily consumption of Solomon's court: 30 kor of fine flour, 60 kor of flour, 10 fattened oxen, 20 pasture-fed oxen, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, fallow deer, and fattened fowl. This monumental shopping list is not just gluttony, it is statistical proof of superabundance. The land produced so much that the king could afford to feed thousands of officials, diplomats, and servants with feasting banquets every day. And the most surprising thing is that, in this initial phase, the people did not complain about taxes. On the contrary, the Bible paints a picture of national euphoria. So Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea. They ate, they drank, and they were merry. The population explosion was accompanied by an agricultural and economic explosion. Prosperity descended from the palace to the hut. The classic description of the Pax Salomonica is immortalized in the phrase, "And Judah and Israel dwelt securely, each man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon." This bucolic image is the pinnacle of the Israelite dream: military security, no invasions, land security, private property, and food security, vine and fig tree. Solomon's wisdom created a protective dome where war became a distant memory. He ruled from Tifsah to Gaza, controlling the vital trade routes that linked Egypt to Mesopotamia. Anyone wishing to trade in the ancient world had to pay a toll to Solomon. But Solomon's prosperity wasn't merely physical, it was intellectual. The philosopher king transformed Jerusalem into a cultural capital. And Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. He wasn't content to govern men. He wanted to understand the world God created. He catalogued botany, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows on the wall. He studied zoology, ornithology, and ichthyology. He composed 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. Solomon was the first scientist king of the Bible, proving that faith in Yahweh is not the enemy of intellect, but its foundation. Prosperity allowed for creative leisure. Because there was no war, there was time to think, to write, to compose. The neighboring nations, accustomed to brutish and illiterate kings who only knew how to wield a spear, were fascinated. And people came from all nations to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Wisdom became Israel's greatest export. They imported gold and exported understanding. However, in the dark corner of this gilded painting, we can already see the machinery that would eventually crush the people. Verse 6 of 1 Kings 4 mentions Adoniram, son of Abda, concerning the tribute. The word tribute here often refers to forced labor, corvée. To keep this machine of luxury and knowledge running, someone had to sweat. Solomon's utopia was sustained by a working class that was beginning to feel the weight of the king's glory on its shoulders. Systemic prosperity is intoxicating, but it has a maintenance cost that grows exponentially. While the people ate, drank, and rejoiced under the fig trees, the nails of the future revolt were being forged in the shadows of efficient administration. But for now, the sun shines brightly on Zion. Money abounds, peace reigns, and the king is the most intelligent man in the world. It is the perfect time for the greatest project of all, to build a house for God. In the 4th year of his reign, in the month of Ziv, the month of flowers, Solomon gives the order that defines his generation. The date is marked with chronicler's precision. In the 480th year after the children of Israel came out of Egypt, Solomon understands that what he's about to do is not merely a public work, it is the theological culmination of the Exodus story. Moses built a mobile tent for a wandering people. Solomon will build a permanent house for a God who has finally given rest to his people. Israel's prosperity has reached such a level of saturation that it must now overflow back to heaven. The temple is the nation's architectural first fruits offering. All the gold, all the talent, and all the accumulated peace will be channeled to Mount Moriah. To realize this vision, Solomon needed technology that Israel did not possess. The Hebrews were shepherds and warriors, not architects and navigators. The humility of wisdom is revealed again. Solomon asks for help. He establishes the first major international trade treaty with Hiram, king of Tyre. The Phoenicians were the masters of the ancient world in timber and navigation. The agreement is a massive exchange of commodities. Solomon supplies wheat and olive oil, the fruit of the land of Israel, and Hiram supplies cedar from Lebanon and Cyprus, the fruit of the northern forests, as well as skilled artisans. Biblical prosperity is not isolationist, it builds bridges. The temple of Yahweh will be built with pagan materials and Gentile hands, foreshadowing a future where all nations will stream to it. The logistics of the construction were colossal. Solomon recruited 30,000 men from Israel for forced labor in Lebanon. They worked in shifts, 10,000 a month in the mountains, 2 months at home. Adoniram oversaw this titanic operation. In addition to them, there were 70,000 porters and 80,000 stonecutters in the mountains. The scale was overwhelming. The stones were not mud bricks. They were large stones, precious stones, hewn stones for the foundations. Some of these stones, still visible today in the Western Wall tunnels, weigh hundreds of tons. How they were moved without modern technology is a testament to engineering driven by devotion and unlimited resources. But the most impressive aspect of this work was not the noise of construction, but its silence. The Bible records a spine-chilling detail, and the house was built with stones prepared at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any other iron tool was heard in the house while it was being built. Think of the sanctity of that silence. The construction site on Moriah had no clang of metal. Why? Jewish tradition teaches that iron is the metal of war, of the sword that shortens man's life. The temple is the place of peace, which prolongs life. It was not appropriate for the instrument of death to be heard in the house of life. The stones were cut to perfection kilometers away in the subsoil of Jerusalem and brought ready to be fitted together like a divine puzzle. This requires an almost supernatural level of planning and precision, wisdom. Each stone had a predestined place before arriving on the mountain. It is a living metaphor for the church. We are living stones, worked by God in the world, the quarry, to be silently fitted into eternity. The interior of the temple was the embodiment of absolute prosperity. There was no visible stone inside. Everything was covered in carved cedar with colocynths and open flowers, and the cedar was overlaid with pure gold. The Holy of Holies, Devere, was a perfect cube of 20 cubits, entirely covered in fine gold. Even the floor was gold. Solomon created an environment where poor matter, stone and wood, disappeared, leaving only the golden reflection of glory. 2 giant cherubim of olive wood covered in gold stretched their wings from one wall to the other, guarding the ark. The veil was blue, purple, and crimson. 7 years had passed. 7 years of sweat, of molten gold, of transported wood, of silent engineering. When the last stone was laid and the last gold ornament polished, the building was finished. It was not the largest temple in the ancient world in size. The Egyptians built larger ones, but it was unparalleled in value per square meter and in artistic excellence. Solomon, the wise king, had fulfilled his primary mission. He took the transient wealth of the earth and transformed it into a sanctuary for the eternal. He proved that prosperity, when well directed, builds bridges between man and God. The temple was empty, shining under the Middle Eastern sun, a golden jewel waiting for its inhabitant. The house was ready. But would God accept to move in? 11 months after the laying of the last stone, the most important day in the history of the Old Testament arrives. We are in the month of Ethanim, the 7th month, during the Feast of Tabernacles. Jerusalem is overflowing. Not only are the tribal leaders there, but the whole congregation of Israel. The city vibrates with an electric energy. Solomon, now dressed in his most splendid royal robes, orchestrates the final transfer. The Ark of the Covenant must leave David's humble tent in the city of David, Zion, and ascend to its eternal rest on Mount Moriah, within the golden cube of the Holy of Holies. The procession is solemn. The priests levitate the ark by its poles. The journey is short in distance, but infinite in theological significance. Every 6 steps, oxen and sheep are sacrificed. The path is paved with blood and worship. When the ark finally enters the temple, passing the gigantic bronze pillars, Jachin and Boaz, silence falls over the crowd. The priests enter the golden darkness of the Holy of Holies and place the ark under the open wings of the giant cherubim. It is the meeting of the ancient desert object, the aged acacia wood of the ark, with the new luxury of the empire, Solomon's gold. At that moment, something strange happens. The poles of the ark are pulled in such a way that their ends become visible from the holy place, but not from outside, a sign that the ark has arrived at its resting place and will travel no further. When the priests left the sanctuary, the response from heaven was overwhelming. A cloud filled the house of the Lord, for the glory of the Lord filled the house. The Hebrew word for glory is kavod, which means weight. The presence of God descended with such physical and spiritual density that the priests could not stand to minister. Think about it. The liturgy was interrupted. The ritual stopped. Organized religion collapsed before the reality of the presence. The cloud was so thick, so terrifying and holy that human service became impossible. The richest man in the world and his finely robed priests were reduced to trembling spectators before divine majesty. Material prosperity, the gold of the temple, was validated by spiritual prosperity, the glory. Without the cloud, the temple would be merely a luxury museum. With the cloud, it became the house of God. Then Solomon ascends onto a bronze platform built in the middle of the courtyard, kneels before all Israel, and stretches out his hands toward heaven. The prayer he offers, 1 Kings 8, is a masterpiece of theology. At the height of his power, he demonstrates surprising intellectual humility. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built? Solomon recognizes God's transcendence. He knows he has not trapped God in a golden box. The temple is not to contain God. It is to guide man. It is a point of contact where the name of God dwells. Solomon prays for the future. He foresees drought, plague, war, and even exile. He knows that today's prosperity does not guarantee tomorrow's faithfulness. He asks for a reset mechanism. When your people sin and turn back to you and pray in this house, then hear from heaven and forgive. He transforms the temple into a machine of forgiveness. He understands that maintaining the blessing depends on continuous repentance. When he finished praying, the book of 2 Chronicles adds the pyrotechnic detail. Fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices. God signed the acceptance of the work with fire. The acceptance was public and dramatic. The people, seeing the fire and the glory, fell face down and worshipped. The dedication feast that followed was the largest barbecue in human history. 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep were offered in peace. The bronze altar was too small for so much meat, so Solomon consecrated the middle of the courtyard as an altar. The prosperity of Israel was poured out in gratitude. No one went hungry in those days. The king sent the people home joyful and glad of heart. This is the mountain peak, the perfect moment, God, the king, and the people in absolute harmony. The temple is full, the throne is firm, the enemy is far away. But in the dead of night, after the feast is over, Yahweh appears to Solomon a second time, 1 Kings 9. And along with the promise to bless the house, God leaves a terrifying conditional warning, an if that would echo through the centuries. But if you and your children turn away from me completely, then I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them. And this house, which I have consecrated for my name, I will cast out of my presence. God placed a warning label on prosperity: fragile, handle with obedience. Solomon heard, but did he understand that the greatest danger was not the failure of the project, but its success? The smoke from the temple's dedication had barely dissipated when the scaffolding rose again in Jerusalem. But this time, the motivation was different. The biblical text of 1 Kings 7 opens with an adversative conjunction that carries the weight of a silent judgment. But Solomon built his own house in 13 years. He finished all his house. The arithmetic is cruel and revealing. 7 years for the house of God, 13 years for the king's house, almost twice the time. Apologists might argue that the palace was a larger and more complex administrative structure than the temple, which is technically true. But theologically, the numbers tell the story of a heart that began to migrate from theocentrism to egocentrism. The priority of time reflects the priority of the soul. The construction of the temple was an act of worship. The construction of the palace was an act of self-affirmation. The royal complex was not merely a residence, it was a city within a city. The jewel in the crown was the house of the forest of Lebanon. Imagine a colossal hall, measuring 100 cubits in length, approximately 50 meters, significantly larger than God's own sanctuary. The name came from the 45 gigantic cedar columns that supported the roof, creating the visual impression of walking within a petrified golden forest. It was a marvel of engineering and aesthetics. But unlike the temple, which housed the Ark of the Covenant, the house of the Forest of Lebanon guarded the king's security. 300 shields of hammered gold and 200 gold bucklers, large shields. Think of the pointless extravagance of it. Gold is a soft, heavy metal, terrible for war. A gold shield won't stop an iron sword, it will deform. These shields weren't for battle, they were for parades, they were security theater. Solomon turned the National Reserve into wall decoration. He hung the nation's wealth on cedar columns just so foreign dignitaries would gape. Prosperity ceased to be functional, to feed and protect the people, and became ornamental, to inflate the monarch's ego. And then there was the throne. Then the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. Ivory, imported from Africa or India, was the ultimate luxury material, obtained through the killing of elephants. To overlay ivory, which is already white and beautiful, with gold seems like a Baroque excess, but it was Solomon's signature. The throne had 6 steps. On each side of each step was a golden lion, totaling 12 lions, representing the tribes of Israel, now subordinated at the king's feet, or perhaps simply royal ferocity. The biblical text makes an observation that sounds almost like a warning. Nothing like it had ever been done in any kingdom. Solomon was no longer competing with neighboring kings. He was competing with the very idea of divinity. To sit on that throne, elevated 6 steps above any other human being, guarded by golden beasts, was an almost godlike experience. The humility of the little boy of Gibeon was swallowed up by the magnificence of the Hebrew pharaoh. Life at court became a whirlwind of luxury. All of King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold. There was no silver in them because in Solomon's day, silver was of no value. The inflation of prosperity was so absurd that it devalued the precious metal. Silver became like the stones on the street. This reveals a dangerous economic and spiritual phenomenon. When blessing becomes commonplace, it loses its value. Gratitude dies in abundance. Solomon and his court began to treat economic miracles as everyday trivialities. During those 13 years of construction, the distance between the king and the people began to widen. The king lived behind walls of cedar and gold. The people lived on the rocky slopes of Judah. The king drank from imported gold goblets. The people paid the taxes that financed those goblets. The justice that marked the beginning of the reign was still there, but now it competed with vanity. Solomon began to believe in his own legend. Wisdom, once a tool of service, became an object of display, just like the peacocks and monkeys that his ships brought from Tarshish. He collected wise men, he collected proverbs, he collected horses. The palace became a museum of ego, and Solomon was, at the same time, the curator and the main attraction. The seduction was complete. He no longer needed God to feel secure. He had the walls of the forest of Lebanon and the golden shields. Faith was replaced by financial fortress. Solomon's fame crossed the deserts. It wasn't just rumors of gold that traveled in the spice caravans, but rumors of the king's mind. In the ancient world, wisdom was the most valuable diplomatic currency. A wise king meant stability, and stability meant profit. Hearing of this phenomenon in Jerusalem, the Queen of Sheba, likely ruler of a wealthy kingdom in the region of present-day Yemen or Ethiopia, decides to undertake an epic journey. She doesn't come as a dazzled tourist, but as an intellectual skeptic. The Bible says she came to test him with riddles. The journey from Sheba to Jerusalem was a massive logistical operation. Some 2,000 kilometers of merciless desert, traveling with a very large retinue, with camels laden with spices and much gold and precious stones. She brought with her the wealth of the south to test the wisdom of the north. When she arrives in Jerusalem, the encounter is not a romantic flirtation, as later legends suggest, but a duel of intellectual titans. The Hebrew word for enigmas is hido, difficult questions, ethical paradoxes, existential riddles. She laid upon Solomon's table the unsolvable problems of the human condition, and the answer was overwhelming. And Solomon declared unto her all his words. There was nothing hidden from the king which he told him not. Imagine the scene in the throne room. The most powerful woman in the incense trade sits before the man who catalogued nature. She fires questions. He returns revelations. Solomon dissected reality before her. But what truly shattered the queen's royal composure wasn't just what she heard, but what she saw. The biblical text is specific about what caused her emotional collapse. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon, and the house that he had built, and the food on his table, and the seating of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings that he offered in the house of the Lord, she was breathless. The expression, she was left breathless, or she had no more breath left, describes a state of aesthetic and spiritual shock. She was stunned by the order. Solomon's prosperity was not chaotic, it was choreographed. The way the waiters served, the hierarchy of the servants, the quality of the uniforms, the logistics of the banquet, everything screamed excellence. She saw God's wisdom applied to human resource management and etiquette. And the final blow was the ascent, the private viaduct or procession by which Solomon went to the temple. She saw the connection between the wealth of the palace and the worship of the temple, and that dismantled her. She realized that the source of that glory was not human. Sheba's confession is the high point of Gentile recognition in the Old Testament. Blessed be the Lord your God, who delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loves Israel forever. Therefore he has made you king, to do justice and righteousness. Note her theology. She recognizes that Solomon's prosperity is proof of God's love for Israel. Solomon is merely the instrument. His wealth has a purpose: to do justice and righteousness. She evangelized the king with the very truth he was beginning to forget. Before departing, an obscene exchange of riches takes place. She gives Solomon 120 talents of gold, about 4 tons, and a quantity of spices such as had never been seen in such abundance. Solomon in turn gave the Queen of Sheba all that she desired and asked for, in addition to what he gave out of his own royal generosity. Prosperity begat generosity. It was a diplomatic win-win moment. But ironically, the Queen of Sheba's departure marks the end of the ascent. She returns to her land laden with wisdom, leaving behind a king who now has more gold than he knows where to store. The peak has been reached, and in the topography of power beyond the peak, there is only the abyss. Sheba's visit validated Solomon before the world, but also left him dangerously confident that he was heaven's favorite, untouchable and eternal. The seed of arrogance was watered with the praises of the Queen of the South. The golden splendor of Jerusalem blinded the eyes to the decay that was beginning to corrode its foundations. To the average observer, Solomon was merely expanding the empire, but to the attentive reader of the law of Moses, the king was marching directly toward the abyss. Centuries earlier, in the desert, God had left a specific safety manual for the future monarchy, the text of Deuteronomy 17. There, God imposed 3 explicit prohibitions on the king of Israel. 1, not to multiply horses for himself, especially from Egypt. 2, not to multiply wives for himself. 3, not to excessively multiply silver and gold. These were not arbitrary rules. They were protective fences against self-sufficiency. Solomon, in his intoxication with success, decided that these rules applied to ordinary men, not to him. The first barrier to fall was the military one. And Solomon had 40,000 stalls for his chariot horses and 12,000 horsemen. He built entire cities, like Megiddo, Hazor, and Giza, dedicated exclusively to housing his war machine. Archaeological excavations at Megiddo revealed the industrial scale of these stables, but the sin was not in the possession of the cavalry, it was in the origin and the reliance. The text says the horses came from Egypt. Solomon reopened the trade route with the nation from slavery. He traded the security of the covenant for the security of the chariot. The king, who began by depending on God's dream, now depended on Pharaoh's war technology. He violated the commandment not to bring the people back to Egypt. Spiritually, Israel was already back on the banks of the Nile, trusting in the strength of the horse and not in the name of the Lord. The second barrier was economic. The Bible records a number that would make any reader of Revelation shudder. The weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents. 666. This number, centuries before John on Patmos, already appeared here as a mark of human imperfection and unbridled materialism. 666 talents is equivalent to about 23 tons of gold annually. Solomon became a financial black hole, absorbing the wealth of nations. He made 200 large shields and 300 smaller shields, all of hammered gold. He covered everything he touched with the yellow metal. The obsession with accumulation has led to a distortion of values. The Bible says that silver was worthless in the days of Solomon. This is described as glory, but economically it is an inflationary catastrophe and, spiritually, a tragedy. When the precious becomes commonplace, the heart loses the capacity for wonder. Solomon trivialized blessing. He turned the extraordinary into the ordinary. The king became a royal merchant, sending ships from Tarshish that returned every 3 years. But what did these ships bring? Gold, silver, ivory, and monkeys and peacocks. Monkeys and peacocks. Decadence is revealed in superfluity. Solomon was spending state resources and human lives, the sailors, to bring exotic pets for the amusement of the court. The wisdom that once served to judge the poor now served to catalogue the emperor's private zoo. Solomon thought he could manage the excess. He believed his wisdom was a sufficient filter to prevent gold from corrupting his soul. But the law of Deuteronomy was clear: lest your heart be lifted up above your brothers. Gold elevated Solomon. He was no longer the brother of the Israelites, he was their lord. The brotherhood of the covenant was replaced by the hierarchy of tyranny. The violation of the Torah was systematic, cold, and calculated. Solomon did not stumble into sin. He built a paved road of gold toward it. He proved that it is possible to have the right theology in the temple and the wrong practice in the palace. The wisest man in the world was acting like the richest fool in history, soaring off the branch of the tree where his own throne rested. And the fall, when it came, would be proportional to the height of his arrogance. If the multiplication of gold was the disease of the kingdom's body, the multiplication of women was the cancer of the king's soul. 1 Kings 11 opens with a statement that sounds like the tolling of a funeral bell. And King Solomon loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. The list that follows is a geopolitical map of condemnation: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. God had explicitly said about these nations, "You shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you, otherwise they will turn your hearts after their gods." The prohibition was never racial, it was theological. It was a spiritual quarantine to prevent the contagion of idolatry. But Solomon, in his cosmopolitan arrogance, believed that his spiritual immune system was invincible. The number is grotesque: 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, 1,000 women. We must look at this harem with double lenses. First, the political lens. In the ancient East, marriage was the final signing of a peace treaty. Solomon, wanting to guarantee the Pax Salomonica without bloodshed, decided to marry the world. Each wife represented a secure border, a commercial alliance, a non-aggression pact. He tried to maintain peace through sex and marital diplomacy instead of maintaining it through exclusive trust in Yahweh. He transformed the royal bed into a negotiating table, but there is a second lens, the lens of lust and vanity. The phrase "Solomon clung to these in love" reveals that it wasn't just cold politics. There was an emotional attachment, a carnal dependence. Solomon became addicted to novelty. The law of diminishing returns of pleasure hit him with full force. The first wife brings euphoria. The 10th brings routine. The 70th is just a face in the crowd. The 1000th is a name on a bureaucratic spreadsheet. Solomon sought fullness in infinite variety and found only infinite fragmentation. He divided his heart into 1,000 pieces, and not a single whole piece remained for the God who made him king. The real tragedy, however, didn't happen in the bedroom, but in the spirit. The Bible says, when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. Note the timing: when Solomon was old. Youth has the protection of passion and idealism. Old age brings weariness and a tendency to compromise. Old Solomon, tired of fighting, tired of maintaining the posture of the wisest man in the world, only wanted peace at home. And when his wives asked, "Build a sanctuary for my God, so that I may feel at home," he yielded. He began to tolerate the intolerable in the name of marital harmony and cultural inclusion. Imagine the spiritual schizophrenia that gripped the palace. That same man who knelt at the dedication of the temple and watched the fire fall, now walked through the royal gardens, listening to chants to Astarte, the Sidonian goddess of fertility and sex, and smelling the incense burned to Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did not formally renounce Yahweh. He did not become an atheist. He did something worse. He became a syncretist. He added Yahweh to the pantheon. He tried to serve two masters or 1,001 masters. He thought he could keep God in the Holy of Holies and the idols on the high places around the city. But God does not accept shared custody. Solomon's heart was not perfect toward the Lord his God as the heart of David his father. David sinned, adultery, murder, but David never, ever bowed down to another god. David was a monotheistic sinner. Solomon became a polymorphous sage. Prosperity financed apostasy. If Solomon had been a poor king, he wouldn't have had the resources to build temples for the gods of his wives. But he had so much gold, so much silver, so much surplus manpower, that building a high place for Chemosh was as easy as snapping his fingers. Wealth removed the practical barriers to sin. He could pay for his mistakes. He could subsidize error. The harem of nations brought not only foreign bodies to Jerusalem, it brought ancient demons that encamped in the holy city, invited by the Lord's own anointed. Wisdom was silenced by the whisper of 1,000 women, and the king who began by listening to God ended by listening to the serpent's seduction. Solomon's descent into hell was not metaphorical, it was geographical. East of Jerusalem, separated only by the Kidron Valley, rises the Mount of Olives. It is a high hill, visible from anywhere in the city of David, and crucially, visible from within the courtyards of the temple of the Lord. It was there, on the mountain that is before Jerusalem, that Solomon committed the act that stained his biography for eternity. The text of 1 Kings 11:7 is stark, but it carries the weight of a cosmic betrayal. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Moloch, the abomination of the Ammonites. Do not underestimate the gravity of this. Solomon not only allowed his wives to worship in secret in their chambers, he used royal engineering, the architects of Israel, and gold from the public treasury to construct religious complexes for demons. And these were not harmless gods. Moloch and Chemosh were deities who demanded the ultimate sacrifice. The cult of Moloch historically involved a hollow bronze statue, heated by an internal fire until it was incandescent, in whose outstretched arms newborn infants were placed. The passing through the fire was not a ritual dance, it was liturgical infanticide. Although the Bible does not explicitly say that Solomon sacrificed his own children, as King Manasseh later did, the fact that he built the stage for such horror is inexcusable. He brought the culture of death into the vicinity of the house of life. Imagine the grotesque scene. The holy smoke of the morning sacrifice rose from the temple of Yahweh on Mount Moriah, and at the same time, the black, foul smoke of idolatry rose from the Mount of Olives, mingling in the sky of Jerusalem. Solomon forced God to visually coexist with his rivals. He profaned the Holy Land. That mountain later became known in history as the Mount of Corruption. 2 Kings 23:13, a topographical scar created by the wisest man in the world. Wisdom without fear became folly. Solomon thought his superior mind could navigate theological complexities, that he could be inclusive without being idolatrous. He was terribly wrong. He broke the first and second commandments of the law that he was supposed to copy and read every day. God's reaction was swift. Divine patience has limits, and public idolatry is that limit. The text says, "Therefore the Lord was angry with Solomon." The word angry here reflects a holy fury, the reaction of a betrayed husband who gave everything to his wife and was replaced by murderous lovers. God appears to Solomon, but this time there is no gentle dream, nor promises of "ask for whatever you want." The tone is one of irrevocable judicial sentence. "Because this has happened in you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant." The word tear, kara, is violent. It is the sound of fabric being destroyed. The unified tunic of Israel, sewn by David and embroidered by Solomon, will be torn to shreds. God announces the end of the united monarchy. The prosperity that Solomon accumulated will not serve as a shield against this decree. However, because of an ancient promise, for the sake of David your father, God grants a painful mercy. The collapse will not happen in Solomon's days, but in the days of his son. And the kingdom will not be completely taken away. One tribe, Judah, will be left like a lamp burning in Jerusalem. Solomon hears his sentence. The man who controlled demons, according to legends, and kings, according to history, cannot control the future of his own dynasty. He discovers the absolute impotence of his wealth before the divine decree. He built palaces to last millennia, but his empire would last only a few more years. Solomon's prosperity at that moment becomes a bitter burden. He knows that everything he built will be divided, plundered, and diminished. Glory has become Ichabod. The Mount of Olives, with its smoking altars, remains there as a monument to human stupidity, proving that it is possible to have the whole world in one's hands and lose one's own soul. The king returns to his ivory throne, but the gold now seems cold and lifeless. The silence of God, who withdraws after the sentence, is more deafening than any thunder. If the books of Kings and Chronicles give us Solomon's external biography, the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, delivers the autopsy report of his soul. It is here, probably written in his bitter old age, that we find the true cost of uncontrolled prosperity. Solomon removes his crown, descends from his ivory throne, and invites us into the dark laboratory of his mind. He begins the text with a cry that echoes through the centuries. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Indeed, the Hebrew word hevel does not only mean futile pride, it means vapor, smoke, breath on a cold day. It is the most precise definition he found for material prosperity. Something that seems solid, occupies visual space, has form, but when you close your hand to possess it, it slips through your fingers, leaving only moisture and emptiness. Chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes is the record of the most expensive scientific experiment in history. Solomon, with unlimited resources, decided to systematically test all sources of human happiness under the sun. He did not do this as an impulsive madman, but as a methodical researcher. My heart still guided me with wisdom. He was sober while he was intoxicated by the world. First, the wine and party test. He sought chemical joy, easy laughter, the euphoria of endless banquets. He discovered that laughter is madness. And the joy of alcohol is a loan of happiness for the next day with very high interest. The night passes, and then comes the existential hangover. Second, the creation test, the building complex. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. He built dams, botanical gardens, forest parks. The joy of seeing a project come to life is real, but ephemeral. As soon as the work is finished, the pleasure evaporates. The creator tires of creation. Solomon looked at his magnificent palaces and felt bored. The stones did not speak to him. Third, the test of possession. I acquired male and female servants. I amassed silver and gold for myself. He experienced the security of numbers, but he discovered the law of diminishing marginal utility. The first million brings security. The 100th million brings anxiety. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver. Wealth became a burden of vigilance. He had to pay guards to watch over the gold he didn't have time to spend. Fourth, the test of aesthetics and sex. I arranged for male and female singers and the delights of the sons of men, women and more women. He had the best music in the world and the most beautiful women of all ethnicities. He transformed his life into a hedonistic work of art. He says, "I denied them nothing that my eyes desired." He didn't go without anything. He eliminated desires. And what was the conclusion of the experiment? And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. The word profit, yitron, is a commercial term meaning positive balance, net profit. Solomon looked at the final balance of his life and saw that the profit was zero. He felt a deep nausea, a hatred of life. Ecclesiastes 2:17. Why? Because death nullifies prosperity. Solomon's nihilism hits rock bottom when he realizes he will die like a fool, and worse, will have to leave everything to a successor who didn't work for it. And who knows whether he will be wise or foolish, yet he will have control over all my work. He looks at Rehoboam, his son, and sees the futility of all his effort. Accumulated prosperity doesn't guarantee a legacy. It often finances the stupidity of the next generation. Solomon discovered that God gives some the power to acquire wealth, but doesn't give them the power to eat of it, enjoy it. That's a malignant disease. He understood too late that the ability to enjoy a simple piece of bread with gratitude is a greater gift than possessing 1,000 oxen with anxiety. The richest man in the world envied the sleep of the worker. He had the world in his pocket, but a black hole in his chest. The laboratory of pleasure exploded in the scientist's face, leaving him covered in ashes and cynicism. While Solomon wallowed in his philosophical nihilism in the gardens of Jerusalem, the real world, the one he neglected in favor of his harems and idols, began to collect its due. God's protection, which functioned as a spiritual iron dome over Israel, was silently deactivated. The text of 1 Kings 11 abruptly shifts its tone. The narrative of peace and security is replaced by a phrase repeated 3 times, like hammer blows on a coffin, "And the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon." The Hebrew word is Satan, adversary, accuser. Not the devil personified, but human agents of divine wrath. The Pax Salomonica did not crumble by chance. It was dismantled piece by the same hand that built it. The first blow came from the south, Hadad, the Edomite. His story reads like a revenge film. When David and Joab massacred the men of Edom decades earlier, Hadad, still a boy, escaped to Egypt. There, he grew up in Pharaoh's court, nourished by the bread of exile and hatred for Israel. When he heard that the old lion, David, and the butcher, Joab, were dead, he returned. Hadad became a constant thorn in the southern border, attacking Solomon's trade routes and reminding the king that security bought with blood has an expiration date. The second blow came from the north. Rezon, son of Eliada, a former bandit captain who fled from the king of Zobah and seized control of Damascus. He founded the kingdom of Syria, Aram, which would become Israel's military nightmare for centuries to come. While Solomon sang with his wives, Rezon was an adversary of Israel all the days of Solomon. The northern border, once secure as far as the Euphrates, began to recede. The empire was shrinking. But the fatal blow, the one that truly tore the king's heart, did not come from a foreigner. It came from within. It came from the system Solomon himself created. Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an Ephraimite. The Bible describes him as a valiant and capable man. Solomon, with his keen eye for talent, saw the effectiveness of this young engineer and promoted him to superintendent of all the burden, forced labor, of the house of Joseph, the northern tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. The irony is tragic. Solomon gave power to the man who would bring him down. He trained his own executioner. Jeroboam witnessed firsthand the suffering of the people under the weight of taxes and the king's megalomaniacal constructions. He saw the dissatisfaction bubbling in the northern tribes who felt exploited to sustain Judah's luxury. The decisive moment takes place on a dusty road outside Jerusalem. The prophet Ahijah the Shilonite intercepts Jeroboam. Ahijah is wearing a new cloak, a symbol of a new and intact kingdom. In the middle of the field, far from Solomon's spies, Ahijah does something shocking. He takes off his new cloak and violently tears it into 12 pieces. Imagine the sound of the fabric tearing in the silence of the field. Ahijah hands 10 pieces to Jeroboam and says, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for I will tear the kingdom from Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." The prophecy is clear. The division is punishment for idolatry, because they have forsaken me and bowed down to Ashtoreth. But God, in his faithfulness to the Davidic covenant, keeps a promise. One tribe, Judah-Benjamin, will remain with the house of David, so that my servant David may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem. Jeroboam receives an incredible conditional offer. If he walks in God's ways, God will build him a firm house, as he built for David. When news of the prophetic conspiracy reaches Solomon's ears, we see the final transformation of his character. The young Solomon would have repented. The old Solomon attempts to kill Jeroboam. The text says, "Therefore Solomon sought to kill Jeroboam." He has become Saul. He is trying to assassinate God's will. He uses his intelligence network and his assassins to hunt down the anointed one. Wisdom has degenerated into tyrannical paranoia. Jeroboam, more cunning and agile, flees to Egypt, finding refuge under the wings of Shishak, a new dynasty in Egypt, hostile to Solomon. The wise king is now isolated. His allies are dead. His enemies are surrounding the borders. His people are murmuring under the whip, and his rival successor is being protected by a foreign superpower. The stage is set for collapse. Prosperity without God could not buy loyalty or security. Solomon is alone atop his mountain of gold, awaiting the end. Solomon's death is recorded in the Bible with a disturbing anticlimax. For a man who lived amidst so much noise, his departure is silent. And Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. There is no record of great national mourning, no final speech of repentance, except perhaps the text of Ecclesiastes left for posterity, and no theophany. The man who conversed with God twice dies in the silence of heaven. He reigned 40 years, long enough to raise Israel to the top of the world, and long enough to plant the seeds that would destroy that top. He leaves behind a rich but morally bankrupt empire, a temple full of gold but surrounded by pagan altars, and an heir who proves that wisdom is not genetic. Rehoboam ascends the throne. He is 41 years old, but acts with the emotional maturity of a spoiled teenager. He is the typical product of the second generation of prosperity. He never knew the cave of Adullam, like his grandfather David. He never felt the insecurity of succession, like his father Solomon. He grew up within the harem, surrounded by eunuchs and flatterers, believing that the world existed to serve him. A crisis erupts in Shechem. The northern tribes, led by the recently returned Jeroboam, present a labor ultimatum. Your father made our yoke heavy, now therefore lighten the hard service of your father, and we will serve you. It is a reasonable request. Solomon's prosperity was built on the broken backs of the people. Rehoboam asks for 3 days to think. He consults the elders, Solomon's advisors, who give him the key to servant leadership. If today you will be a servant to this people, they will be your servants forever. But Rehoboam rejects the ancient wisdom. He consults the young men who had grown up with him, the playboys of the court. Their response is distilled arrogance. Tell them, My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. My father chastised you with whips, I will chastise you with scorpions. Rehoboam's response is the political suicide of Israel. When he utters those insolent words before the assembly, the war cry of secession echoes, "What portion do we have in David? To your tents, O Israel!" The kingdom instantly tears itself apart. 10 tribes declare independence. Rehoboam, in denial, sends Adoniram, Solomon's old tax collector, to force labor. The people respond with stones. Adoniram is stoned to death. Rehoboam, the king of the scorpions, climbs into his chariot and flees in terror to Jerusalem. The united monarchy, the geopolitical jewel that David and Solomon took 80 years to build, ceased to exist in 3 days of stupidity. But the final humiliation of the Golden Age comes 5 years later. Shishak, king of Egypt, Jeroboam's former protector, smells blood. He marches against Jerusalem. He doesn't come to annex, he comes to plunder. He enters the temple and the palace. The text of 1 Kings 14:26 is heartbreaking. And he took the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and he took everything. He also took all the shields of gold which Solomon had made. Remember the golden shields of the house of the forest of Lebanon, those that represented the untouchable glory of Solomon. They were taken to Egypt. The wealth of Israel was melted down to pay Egyptian mercenaries. And what did Rehoboam do? And King Rehoboam made shields of bronze in their place. This is the ultimate metaphor for the fearless prosperity theology. We begin the story with gold, Solomon, and end with bronze, Rehoboam. Gold is divine, pure, valuable. Bronze is a human alloy, cheap, which only looks like gold if it is highly polished, but does not have the same value. The religion of Israel had become a religion of bronze. They maintained the liturgy, they maintained the temple, they maintained the appearance, they polished the shields, but the glory, the real value, had been plundered. Solomon's kingdom did not fall for lack of money, it fell for overconfidence in wealth. Material prosperity, which should have been a servant of the covenant, became the master that enslaved the king, and in the end, abandoned the nation when the bill came due. The sun sets over Jerusalem, reflecting no longer on pure gold, but on the dull bronze of a glory that is gone. Looking at the metaphorical ruins of Solomon's reign, the golden shields turned to bronze, the United Kingdom torn in two, the altars to Moloch still smoking on the horizon, we are forced to ask the difficult question, did prosperity fail? If the wisest, richest and most well-connected man in history couldn't end well, what hope remains for us? Solomon's biography, read in isolation, is a Greek tragedy. A meteoric rise followed by a slow and painful fall into spiritual irrelevance. He proves definitively that having everything is not enough. The hole in the human heart is the size of God, and not all the gold of Ophir can fill it. But the Bible doesn't end at 1 Kings 11. 1,000 years later, a Nazarene carpenter walks the dusty roads of Galilee. He has no palace, no army, no 700 wives, and curiously says he has nowhere to lay his head. Yet, when confronted by the religious leaders of his time, he makes a statement that would have sounded like blasphemy if it weren't the pure truth. In Matthew 12:42, Jesus says, "The queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, something greater than Solomon is here. Here is one greater than Solomon." This phrase is the golden key that unlocks the full meaning of our journey. Jesus did not come to replicate Solomon's model. He came to redeem and surpass him. Wisdom, Solomon had wisdom about things, botany, zoology, proverbs. Jesus is the wisdom of God incarnate, 1 Corinthians 1:24. Solomon's wisdom could not prevent him from sinning. Christ's wisdom led him to perfect obedience unto death. Solomon knew how to resolve disputes between prostitutes. Jesus knew how to forgive their sins. The temple. Solomon built a house of dead stones and cold gold, where glory visited, but the people remained outside. Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up," referring to his own body. Christ built a temple of living stones, us, where the Holy Spirit dwells permanently. In Solomon's temple, there was a veil separating God from man. At the death of Christ, the greater Solomon, the veil was torn from top to bottom. The access that Solomon could never give, Jesus guaranteed. The sacrifice. Solomon offered 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. The blood flowed like a river, but it never cleansed the conscience, only covered the guilt. Jesus offered a sacrifice, his own blood, once and for all. Solomon's prosperity required the sacrifice of others. Taxes, labor. The prosperity of the gospel is based on God's self-sacrifice. Wealth. Solomon accumulated wealth for himself and ended up empty-handed. Jesus emptied himself, Philippians 2, and enriched us. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. 2 Corinthians 8:9. True biblical prosperity, therefore, is redefined at the end of this saga. It is not the absence of problems. Solomon had peace, but created his own demons. It is not the accumulation of wealth, which Shishak could steal or inflation could erode. True prosperity is the uninterrupted presence of God and the ability to enjoy it with contentment. Solomon ended his life in Ecclesiastes 12:13 with the only possible conclusion for someone who has seen the top and the bottom. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." He discovered that life without God is vanity, but life with God, whether in the palace or in prison, with shields of gold or bronze, has weight, meaning, and eternity. We close this book not by worshipping Solomon, but by learning from him. He is the mirror that shows us the danger of a divided heart. He teaches us that blessing, gold, peace, influence is a more difficult test than trial. Poverty can embitter us, but wealth can seduce us. The only safety lies in maintaining the posture of that young man from Gibeon. I am a small child. As long as we are small in our own eyes, dependent on grace, we will be safe. The moment we think the throne is ours by right, the golden shields have already begun to turn to bronze. May our quest not be for the gold of Ophir, but for the wisdom that descended from heaven. For the gold remains in Egypt, but wisdom leads us home. The story of Solomon is not just about a king who lived 3,000 years ago. It is a mirror for us today. We all have our own Gibeon, the moment of humility, and we all run the risk of having our own Mount of Olives, the moment of concession. The question that remains is not whether you have gold or bronze in your shields, but who sits on the throne of your heart. True prosperity is not what you accumulate, but whom you worship. If this documentary has changed your perspective on wealth, wisdom, and purpose, I have a challenge for you. Write the phrase, "I choose wisdom," in the comments below. Let's see how many of us are willing to trade our bronze shields for the true presence of God. And don't forget, the story of Israel continues. If you want to see how the divided kingdom faced its prophets and kings, subscribe now and turn on notifications. The saga is just beginning.